Hi friends, welcome. I am S.D. Farande and today we are continue our unit selection of anti-friction bearings, which is unit number 6. Today we see classification of rolling contact bearings. In last lecture we seen that what is the anti-friction bearing and what are the classification of the sliding contact bearing. In anti-friction bearing there are two types. One is the sliding contact and another is the rolling contact. In today's lecture we will see what are the classification of rolling contact bearings. Last lecture we seen sliding contact and rolling contact bearing. Here the figure shows the sliding contact as well as rolling contact bearing. Here you can see in sliding contact bearing there is a contact surface have a sliding contact, and in rolling contact bearing there is the contact surface having a rolling contact. Okay, we will see now what is the classification of rolling contact bearing. Last lecture ला आपण या sliding contact bearing चे क्लासिफिकेशन बघितलेलं आहे. या लेक्चरला रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेअरिंगचे क्लासिफिकेशन बघायचे आहेत. स्लाइडिंग आणि रोलिंग मधला फरक लक्षात यावा म्हणून हा पॉइंट या ठिकाणी घेतला आहे. स्लाइडिंग आणि रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्टचा हा पॉइंट लास्ट लेक्चरला सुद्धा आपण कव्हर केला आहे. तर बघूया रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेअरिंग याची क्लासिफिकेशन काय आहेत. क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेअरिंग. रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेअरिंग कंसिस्ट ऑफ 4 पार्ट्स. One is the inner race, outer race, a rolling element and a cage. बरोबर, जी फिगर आपण बघितली होती या फिगर मध्ये तुम्ही बघू शकताय क्लिअरली. या ठिकाणी इनर रेस, आउटर रेस, त्यानंतर रोलिंग एलिमेंट म्हणजे हा जो बॉल आहे हा रोलिंग एलिमेंट आणि केज म्हणजे या सगळ्या बॉलला जॉईन करणारी एक केज असते, ज्या फिगर मध्ये दाखवलेली नाही आहे. केज असे टोटल 4 पार्ट असणार आहेत रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेअरिंग मध्ये. तर याचे क्लासिफिकेशन काय बघूया. फर्स्ट इज द बॉल बेअरिंग. रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेअरिंगचे 2 टाइप आहेत. एक आहे बॉल बेअरिंग आणि दुसरा आहे रोलर बेअरिंग. पहिल्यांदा बॉल बेअरिंग बघूया. बॉल बेअरिंग मध्ये टोटल 6 टाइप्स आहेत, त्याचे क्लासिफिकेशन्स आहेत. पहिलं जे आहे ते कुठलं आहे, सिंगल रो डीप ग्रूव बॉल बेअरिंग. या फिगर मध्ये तुम्ही बघू शकताय. आता हा जो सिंगल रो डीप ग्रूव बॉल बेअरिंग आहे हा कशा पद्धतीने असतोय आणि हा कुठे वापरला जातोय. ड्युरिंग असेंबली ऑफ दिस बेअरिंग रेसेस आर इसेंट्रिक अँड द बॉल्स आर inserted between the races. Balls are symmetrically located with the help of a retainer or cage after the centering of races. Deep groove ball bearings have high radial load carrying capacity and suitability for high running speeds. In addition to this advantage, they can take up moderate thrust load. This is the single row deep groove bearing. Next one is the single row deep groove ball bearing with notch or with filling notch. You can see in figure they have notches in the inner and outer races, due to which maximum number of balls can be inserted in deep groove ball bearings. Due to inserted number of balls, their radial load carrying capacity increases by considerable amount. Balls inserted through the notches should be forced in position so that notches will be extended to the bottom of raceway. Next one is the angular contact bearing. In these bearings, one side of the outer race is cut away, due to which more number of balls can be inserted than a deep groove ball bearing without having a notch cut into both races. They are used to take up a relatively large axial load in one direction along with radial load. Angular contact bearings are usually used in pairs. Due to this, it is possible to take up axial load in both directions. Next one is the self-aligned bearings. There are called as self-aligning bearings because they allow the shaft to deflect through 2 to 3 degrees. They are of two types. One is the externally self-aligned bearing. Outer diameter of the outer race is machined and ground to a spherical surface which fits in a mating spherical surface frame or housing. And next type is the internally self-aligned bearing. Inner diameter of the outer race is machined and ground to a spherical surface of frame or housing. Next type is the double row deep groove ball bearing. These bearings can be made with radial or angular contact between the balls and races. They consist of two spherical balls as rolling elements as compared to single row deep groove ball bearings. Number of pairs of two spherical balls are positioned equally across the circumference of bearing in between inner and outer races. Due to two rows of balls, radial and thrust load carrying capacity of these bearings is high. And last is the thrust ball bearing. They consist of spherical balls running between two rings, shaft ring and housing ring. Shaft ring rotates along with the rotating shaft such that its machined surface which makes contact with the balls is perpendicular to axis of rotation. These bearings can take only thrust means axial load and no radial loads. These are the types of ball bearings. Second classification point under the rolling contact bearing is the roller bearings. In the roller bearings, first one is the cylindrical roller bearing. You can see in figure, they consist of number of solid cylindrical rollers located between inner and outer races. These cylindrical rollers are symmetrically placed with the help of retainer ring or cage. They are comparatively more rigid against radial motion. They are used in case of high speeds. ज्या ठिकाणी हाय स्पीड्स असणार आहे अशा ठिकाणी आपण सिलेंड्रिकल रोलर बेरिंग यूज करत असतो. सेकंड टाइप इज द spherical roller bearings. They consist of roller elements in the form of spherical rollers. They are also called as self-aligning bearings. The self-aligning feature is achieved by means of grinding one of the races in the form of sphere. Smaller annular misalignments are permissible in this bearing. And this spherical roller bearing having two types. First type you can see in figure, single row spherical bearing having a single row of rollers spread across the circumference of bearing. This bearing has a very high radial load carrying capacity but limited thrust means axial load carrying capacity. And second type is the double row spherical roller bearing having two rows of rollers spread across the circumference of bearings. This bearing has a high radial and thrust means axial load carrying capacity. This is the spherical roller bearing. Next one is the taper roller bearings. In this type of bearings, rollers and raceways are in the form of truncated cone. These bearings can carry thrust load. The elements of conical surfaces of rollers and raceways intersect at a common point. And last type is the needle roller bearings. They consist of roller elements in the form of thin cylindrical rollers all around the circumference of bearings. They possess highest possible radial load carrying capacity for a given size of bearing. No retainer or cage is required in these bearings. They are used as piston ring bearings in heavy duty diesel engines where heavy loads are to be carried with an oscillatory motion. These bearings are preferred where available radial space is limited. म्हणजे ज्या ठिकाणी रेडियल स्पेस कमी असणार आहे अशा ठिकाणी आपण अशा टाइपची बेरिंग यूज करणार आहे. These are the detailed classification of the rolling contact bearings. Then what are the applications of rolling contact bearing? First is the machine tool spindle. Machine tool spindle मध्ये आपण यूज करत असतोय. Second is the automobile front and rear axle. Third one is the gearboxes. Fourth is the small size electric motors. Next, rope sheaves, crane hook and hoisting drum. And last is the household electric appliances. These are the applications of rolling contact bearing. Then advantages and disadvantages of rolling contact bearing. First is the advantages. First advantage is that rolling contact bearings need low starting torque as compared to sliding contact bearing. रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेरिंग मध्ये फ्रिक्शन कमी असणार आहे त्यामुळे स्टार्टिंगला टॉर्क जो लागणार आहे तो कमी लागतोय ऍज कम्पेअर्ड टू स्लाइडिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेरिंग. सेकंड इज द रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेरिंग्स आर इंटरनॅशनली स्टँडर्डाइज्ड, इंटरचेंजेबल अँड रेडिली ऑब्टेनेबल. रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेरिंग जे आहेत हे इंटरचेंजेबल पार्ट आहेत म्हणजे असेंब्लीमध्ये आपण हे पार्ट कशा पद्धतीने यूज करू शकतोय. स्टँडर्डाइज केलेला आहे त्याला. बेरिंगचा नंबर जर घेतला तर तो ऑल ओव्हर वर्ल्ड कुठं जरी गेलं तर तो आपल्याला त्या नंबरचा बेरिंग तेच येणार आहे. लक्षात आलं म्हणजे काय इंटरनॅशनली स्टँडर्ड केलेला आहे आणि हा रेडिली मार्केटमध्ये आपला अवेलेबल असणार आहे अकॉर्डिंग टू द स्पेसिफिकेशन ऑफ द बेरिंग. They are easy to lubricate and consume less lubricant. One bearing can carry both radial and axial loads at the same time. दोन्ही प्रकारचे लोड हा बेरिंग घेत असते. May be used in either high or low temperature application. Bearing rigidity can be improved by preloading. Preloading करून त्या बेरिंगची रिजिडिटी आपण इम्प्रूव्ह करू शकतोय. Ability to resist the shock load. Shock load सुद्धा हा सस्टेन करणार आहे बेरिंग. इझी फॉर माउंटिंग. माउंट करणं सुद्धा हा बेरिंग सोपा आहे. नेक्स्ट इज द लो स्टार्टिंग अँड रनिंग फ्रिक्शन एक्सेप्ट हाय स्पीड. मोर ॲक्युरसी इन शाफ्ट अलाइनमेंट. कॉम्पॅक्ट रिक्वायर्ड लेस स्पेस. लो मेंटेनन्स कॉस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ नो नेसेसिटी ऑफ lubrication during operation. These are the advantages. And disadvantages are more noisy at high speed, initial cost is high, and design of shaft and housing feature are more complicated in this rolling contact bearing. These are the disadvantages. Next, now we will see the comparison of rolling contact and sliding contact bearing. In last lecture we seen the sliding contact bearing and today we seen the rolling contact bearing. Then what are its comparison points? First is the in sliding contact bearing size of bearing is large for same load carrying capacity, and in rolling contact bearing size of bearing is small for same load carrying capacity. म्हणजे बेरिंगची साइज स्लाइडिंग मध्ये जास्त असणार आहे, रोलिंग मध्ये कमी असणार आहे. सेकंड कंपॅरिझन पॉइंट इज द हाय कोएफिशिएंट ऑफ फ्रिक्शन ऑफ स्लाइडिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेरिंग अँड लो कोएफिशिएंट ऑफ फ्रिक्शन ॲट स्टार्टिंग अँड रनिंग इन रोलिंग कॉन्टॅक्ट बेरिंग. In sliding contact bearing, no preloading is necessary, but in rolling contact bearing, there are preload when desirable to minimize deflection and more accuracy. Next is the in sliding contact bearing life is less and rolling contact bearing life is larger. Cost of sliding contact bearing is less and cost of rolling contact bearing is more. Shaft and housing feature is easy in sliding contact bearing, and in rolling contact bearing shaft and housing feature is complicated. Resistance to the shock is higher in sliding contact bearing, and in rolling contact bearing it is a lower. In sliding contact bearing housing diameter is less, and in rolling contact bearing it is a large. In sliding contact bearing, due to lubrication, less sensitive to dirt. जे dirt particles असणार आहे त्याला हा कमी sensitive असणार आहे. In rolling contact bearing, there are sensitive to dirt. Okay, this is the comparison of rolling contact and sliding contact bearings. Okay, thank you friends.